When it comes to self-development, no matter the method you use, the vital point is to practice. If you're ready to transform your life and claim the potential inside of you, then you're in the right place. Welcome to The Vital Point. I'm your host, Jonathan Schecter. I am a psychedelic integration and transformation coach, breathwork facilitator, and an enthusiast of personal growth. You have the capacity to evolve and bring your intentions and dreams into the world, and there's never been more access to so many incredible modalities that can help you on your journey. This podcast will help you learn simple methods you can use to transform your life and share the stories of practitioners who are doing the work so that you feel inspired to go and practice, because that's the vital point. I'm so happy that you're here with me. I'd like to begin with one of those simple practices, and it's related into the topic of the episode today. So this is a practice called orientation, and it's from Somatic Experiencing, and it's a deceptively simple practice. In fact, there's sometimes when I do it where I feel like, am I actually doing anything? But mark my words, it is a profound thing to practice and super great for our nervous system. And depending on where you're at, it might actually feel really different. So it's only going to take a couple of minutes. However, if you're driving, please don't do this practice while you're driving. But if you're in a safe place where you can stop, I invite you just to take a deep breath and let your eyes go where they want to go. Just allow them to start to wander. Just really taking in your environment, letting your neck move, letting your eyes move, just letting them go where they want to go without focusing on anything in particular. And you can be curious about something that draws your attention, but really just letting yourself take in the entire environment. You can also check in with the senses. What do you feel on your skin? Maybe the air conditioning or heat of the sun, of the air in the room. What do you hear? Are there any smells? What sort of sensations do your feet feel? Really just allowing yourself to take it in. And noticing what the quality of that experience is like in the body. And there you go. Quick introduction to orientation. Orientation has some amazing benefits. For one, it allows the nervous system to experience and demonstrate. We're demonstrating to the nervous system that there's no danger in our environment. We're showing ourselves that the environment that we're in is safe. We're also able to start to notice the external rather than what many of us are doing, which is spending most of our time in our internal experience. And in the language of somatic experiencing, we're able to pendulate a little bit. We're able to move from the internal experience into the outward experience, outside experience. And that's really important, especially as we're working through trauma or working with things that might feel uncomfortable in the body. So that awareness to the outside can be a resource for us to shift the attention And so I invite you to try that a few times a day. It doesn't have to be a long time. It can be 20 to 30 seconds. As we continue to do it, as we habituate to it, we can start to have that as a resource. Like I said, if things start to get overwhelmed on the internal, we can pause and do orientation to our external environment just to notice. And this is a rabbit hole that goes pretty deep. And I'm not going to be able to explain everything about somatic experiencing during this episode, but it is the topic that I wanted to talk about today. I just finished the second of 8 training modules for my somatic experiencing practitioner certification to become a professional. And it was a really profound experience, and I wanted to share a little bit about what I learned. And, so the orientation is a good way to start. So let's start with what is SE? What is somatic experiencing? And I'm going to call it SE for the sake of simplicity for the rest of the show. But SE is a body-based way of working with trauma, and also to become more resourced and being able to regulate your nervous system. It's based on the work of Dr. Peter Levine and has been around for quite a few years now. And it's just a really profound way to work with trauma, as well as developing and nurturing the sense of what's positive in your experience. And that's really important as we get into trauma work, is not always being so consumed with the trauma, which, by the way, if you are, is completely natural. That's what trauma does. It dysregulates us. It's an interruption where we're disconnected from life. We start to tunnel into our trauma experience. And by using methods like SE, we can start to not only work with our trauma, but also notice the other things that are outside of it and start to orient to those as well. So this second session, which was 4 days, was really, the theme of it was about self-protection and diving into these self-protective responses that our nervous system has. Because that's what our nervous system is really doing. It's a self-protective way of keeping us safe from danger. Now, the question is whether that is real danger or perceived danger. Oftentimes it's perceived danger, but to the nervous system, there's not really a difference. That's where things can get a little bit tricky. So in terms of these self-protective responses, even though life is complex and multidimensional and myriad, the nervous system really only has a few responses. It has a fight response, a flight response, and a freeze response. And there's also like what you could call a flow, right? Which is relaxed and alert in the language of the nervous system in our parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest system, as opposed to the sympathetic, which is our fight or flight system. But outside of that flow state, there's really just these 3 responses of fight, flight, and freeze. And each of them is this wonderful gift of a way of protecting ourselves. And each of them is valid. They're all equally valid. One isn't better or worse than the other, despite the taboos or stigma that might come with them. Now, some of these are learned experiences. We learn them growing up. We learn them from our family. We might learn to suppress them in certain ways. Certainly there are jobs that encourage us to suppress, right? Especially like the flight response. There are jobs that it's not appropriate to run away or to freeze, right? But really, all of these are amazing self-protective responses. And from the lens of SE, you could say that trauma is an incomplete self-protective response that's waiting to be completed. It's in the nervous system. It's not in the event itself. And trauma is what happens when the nervous system gets overwhelmed by something, where we experience too much too fast. And so the nervous system gets overwhelmed. So that could be something like a car crash or, an assault, something that happens very quickly and overwhelms the system. It can also be something that occurs when there's a activation over time that's not allowed to discharge. And so it builds up over time. It's a chronic thing. And then we eventually go over our capacity to hold it. Right? And the thing about these experiences of trauma is once we've experienced them, they tend to get stuck in the body. We're not a species as humans that is very good at this natural cycles of activation and discharge and completion the way that other animals do. And if you've ever seen an animal shaking to discharge, or seeing a possum play possum, animals playing dead, going into the freeze response, they get up after they're done, when they complete and they discharge, and then they go about their day. It's not something that's lingering on in their experience. And we as people don't do as good a job with this. We tend to get stuck because we're not really encouraged, sometimes allowed, to complete those responses. And so some of that energy gets stuck in the body. And when it gets stuck in the body and the nervous system encounters a similar thing, we perceive that as dangerous as the first experience was. And we might take it for a different amount of danger than we actually are in. So we get triggered. We have sort of flashbacks, or our nervous system goes to a place that's not in the present moment, because there's that self-protective response that wants to complete and hasn't had the chance to yet. And so one of the gifts of the SE work is being able to work with that trauma that's in the body, that's already there, and helping yourself, and then, eventually helping clients to be able to complete it. And one of the things that came up this weekend that I've been playing with, that's really the SE way, is to slow everything down. In the SE language, they call it titrating the experience. And so even with, working with my own trauma, I have the tendency to want to dive into it. Let's just get it out. Let's get this over with. Let's cry it out. Let's shake it out. I feel good that I'm able to do those things. Other people might feel really stuck or really scared if they started to shake and they're having a stressful situation. I don't, but I want to let's get it over with. And really the SE way is to just take these little bits. And it's amazing to discover what these little bits can actually do, and the power of taking these very, very small bits of the experience rather than trying to deal with the whole experience, and slowing down to be able to notice what's happening with these little bits. And so we got to do these different exercises in regards to the fight, flight, freeze, and also setting boundaries, where we were just doing these little bits of movement or little bits of exploration, and slowing it down to a place where we actually could notice, So within the lens of SE, it's interesting. I was talking about this earlier with someone. Oftentimes with trauma work, the desire is to, let's get this over with. Let's get this out. I want this to be done. I want to go back to the way that things were before the trauma. And certainly situationally, there could be something that gets triaged. You might be in a unhealthy relationship that needs to resolve, or a job, or, something like that. But more often than not, more often than changing the external situation, I think, is changing your relationship to the trauma by reframing, by completion of the energy itself, and by becoming more resourced and growing your capacity to actually work with that trauma. Because once we've experienced a trauma, it might not ever completely disappear from our life. But we certainly can become more resourced and grow our capacity. So a resource is something positive, something that we can use to support ourselves. So that orientation practice that we did at the beginning is a resource. We start to come out of the internal experience, which is where we go when we're experiencing or re-experiencing our trauma, right? It's we're not really in the present unless the trauma is actually happening in the moment. We're actually sort of going back in time and dissociating a bit, and like we're in that traumatic event again, right? So it's a way to kind of move our attention out of that. The breath can be the resource. It's one of the reasons that breath work is so important to me. Because using our breath, we can change the state of our nervous system. We can shift out of the immediacy of the moment and kind of move into a more spacious space. Spacious space doesn't sound great, but whatever, I already said it. And that capacity, you could call resilience, you could call strength, you could call the ability to hold more. And the facilitator over the weekend had this wonderful example of that in terms of a fruit bowl. And she called it growing the fruit bowl, growing the size of the fruit bowl, because if we start with this really small fruit bowl, we don't have a whole lot that we can put into it. Something like a grapefruit or even a couple of apples might take up the whole bowl. And then we're just trying to put more into the bowl, and the bowl can only hold so much before it starts to spill out, right? So by increasing our capacity, we're able to make that bowl bigger. The amount of nervous system activation that we can feel comfortable working with increases. And so I also use these types of practices with clients as well, doing things like ice baths, more activating breath work where we're, purposefully bringing in sympathetic nervous system activation so that we can get more resilient. Some people will do work in the sauna, which I'd love to do more of. I haven't had a chance to do it as much as cold exposure, but anything where we're getting slightly uncomfortable, but not overwhelmed, finding a manageable amount of stress, so like exercise could be that. So yeah, those are the important things to remember, is the capacity and the resource. And within that is a wonderful journey of, exploration and renegotiation and a completion, hopefully. It was interesting. Yesterday, as part of the training, we have these group case consults. And I mentioned that this was the second module of the training. So the first module of the training, when I was there, I felt really overwhelmed and like an imposter. I was in this room with a lot of therapists, a lot of people doing some heavy lifting as far as the clients that they were working with and the trauma that they were helping to support the resolution of, people with a lot of education, a lot of experience. And I had this moment that was quite pervasive over the first training of, what am I doing here? I'm a breathwork facilitator. I'm a coach. SE has been really helpful for me in terms of integrating my plant medicine and psychedelic experiences. But am I supposed to be in this training? Like, I'm not a therapist. I don't want to be a therapist. I want to be able to support my coaching clients with this modality, but gosh, am I in the right place, And I felt some of that come up last night as we did the group case consult, and people were bringing these cases that they're, working on, patients that they're working on forward. And I thought, gee, like, even with a lot of my clients within the context of the treatment center that I'm working at, they're coming to me in a group, and even the people that I'm working with one-on-one, I'm usually only getting to work with them for one session. And so I had this initial thought of like, well, gee, am I able to help people resolve their trauma the way that some of these therapists are talking about, people that see clients week after week for months or years and are able to develop this rapport and, trust. And certainly I've had a few coaching clients like that, but that's an area that I'm still developing. Right. And a lot of the clients that I have now, like I mentioned in the context of the treatment center, I'm not able to have those experiences at the moment. And then I had a very much more expansive thought, which is, well, I might not be able to help resolve the trauma directly the way that some of these therapists are, but I am in a prime position to help people with resourcing. And that's really been my focus of how I'm integrating SE into my services, is adding some orientation into my breathwork groups, adding some tracking, which is like orientation, but turning it inward and noticing what's happening in the body. And, through my breathwork, I'm really able to help with the resourcing piece of it, and help people develop those resources, help them with maybe not the trauma resolution, but the other part of SE, which is noticing the good and leaning into the good and really learning to savor that. I went through this sort of experience in my own SE work. I've been working with a SE practitioner now for almost 4 years. And at first it was just a lot of trauma, and big cathartic releases, a lot of crying, a lot of shaking, a lot of heavy stuff, And I got to a place where I was like, should I continue to do this? Because it feels like we're just cycling through this trauma experience over and over. I almost gave up. But right when I was about to give up, that's when we started like leaning into the good, going more for the resourcing. And it completely has transformed my experience. I might notice something very pleasant or beautiful, or whether that's external, like a sunset, like a bird, or a particular painting, plant, something in the environment, or something inside of myself. And I really pause to take that in, to notice what that feels like. And it might seem foreign, or it might not seem like you're doing a whole lot, but believe me, it starts to shift your experience, because it's what we're focusing on. And, those moments, those good moments, can become these resources for ourselves. Something that we can move away from the trauma experience into. Yesterday, I had a session with my practitioner, and we were working with something that had come up at the training that felt really uncomfortable. And as we continued to explore it, what ended up coming up was that this belief, this limiting belief that I had, that surprises were inherently dangerous, and that nothing good ever happened as a surprise. And after we had explored the feeling and discharged a little bit, one of the questions that my therapist asked me was, can you think of a time where that belief was challenged? In other words, can you think of a time that a surprise was good? And there was this memory that came up of a time in Tibet. We climbed up this mountain. There's a stupa, which is a Buddhist shrine, you could call it, on the top of this mountain that we could see. And we decided to climb up and go to the stupa. And in the stupa was this monk that was a student of my teacher. And it was completely unexpected. We didn't know that there was going to be anybody there, let alone somebody with whom I had this connection with. And not only was it really pleasant to remember that day and how I felt in that memory, it led me into really feeling in my body what happens when I think of my teacher, when I'm around my teacher, and led me into this deep appreciation of the resource that he is for me in my life, and how grateful I feel to have that connection, and how surprising it is for me to meet him in the physical, how surprising it is what happens in my body in the most incredibly loving way. And so that's an example of creating these resources for yourself, and having something to go from the trauma experience into, right? And that's the natural flow of the nervous system, is expansion, contraction, just like the breath. In, out, just like the world, day, night, you know? And it's an amazing thing to grow that capacity. More and more, I feel drawn to using these resources to help my coaching clients getting unstuck. Because that stuckness is that protective mechanism of the nervous system, trying to keep us safe from a perceived danger. But oftentimes that stuckness is keeping us from truly embodying what we want or stepping into something new, you know, getting the new job that's more fulfilling, or, you know, going on an adventure, maybe a trip, or, you know, something new. It's keeping us from living our best life, you know? And the amazing thing about the nervous system is that it really is the way. You know, 80% of our nervous system is going from the body to the brain. And so many of us are trying to like use mindset or manifestation or think our way out of discomfort in the body, when really that doesn't work. What works is getting into the body and allowing ourselves to complete in this healthy, titrated way. And then once we've completed, then the mindset works. Then the manifestation work. Then the changes that we want to make can flow so much easier. And so this training, and especially the group consult, really gave me some clarity around how I want to incorporate and use these tools in my work, in my coaching work. And, you know, it's already transformed the way that I teach and coach breath work. When I first started doing breath work with people, it was all transformational style, you know, connected breathing, these big, deep experiences, you know, neurodynamic breath work. And I still do those things. I still love them. And I'm still super, super excited to take people into these expanded realms of consciousness, because there's so much transformation that can happen there. And I've also completely shifted my thought about the importance of nervous system regulation and resourcing and using the breath to assist with those things. And so now the way that I'm coaching is like, hey, let's do somatic awareness work. Let's do breath awareness work. Let's get into the body. What's happening in there? Can you orient into your outer environment? Can you turn that orientation inward? And then can we also use the breath to help to regulate the nervous system, you know, so that you have more capacity to work with the discomfort that you're still holding, as well as starting to habituate the nervous system to a more regulated, a more expansive state, rather than being so contracted. And so, yeah, I've had 3 clients so far, you know, beta testing out this, you know, breathwork program. And I'll be talking about that more soon as we, you know, kind of launch it to a larger group and a larger audience. And if you're interested in any of that, love to chat with you. I have openings right now for new clients. So that's a little bit of what I got into over the weekend. And I'm really excited to continue to learn and to share and to see how I can apply some of these methods with clients. And so I think it would be great to close the way that we opened, with a little bit of orienting. So Again, just, making sure that you're safe first, but just allowing your eyes to go where they want to go. Letting them wander, letting them move through your environment. Just being curious about what they notice. Not concentrating on anything, but being curious about what they're drawn to. Noticing the quality of the breath. Noticing what we hear. Maybe what we taste. What we feel. The feeling of our feet on the floor. The feeling of our clothes or the air against our skin. Maybe something that we smell. Really just seeing if we can be with that external experience. Demonstrating to the nervous system that everything in our environment is safe at the moment. That we're able to relax into the experience. And again, it doesn't have to be a big thing. It could be 30 seconds of orienting a few times a day. Just noticing the shift that starts to happen for you. So thank you again for supporting the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't left a review on Apple or Spotify, I would really appreciate it. Really helps the algorithm start to push the show to more people. And speaking of more people, if there's somebody that you know that you think would enjoy the podcast, please share it with them. My goal is to continue to expand the show. Got lots of cool episodes coming up for you. And so I hope that this experience gave you the inspiration to start a new practice, this orienting, if you're not doing it already. It's a micro amount of effort for a macro amount of return. And that's the vital point. The vital point is to practice. It's not enough to just hear about these things if we want to actually change and shift and transform. And so that orientation is a really simple way to do that. So hope this inspired you to do a little bit more practice. Hope to see you again soon. Till then, keep practicing because that's the vital point.